Friends, today we gather to worship God and to remember and celebrate the life of our dear friend, beloved family member, and esteemed colleague, Rod Davis. Rod was a remarkable person who lived an extraordinary life. He was a man of deep faith and insatiable curiosity. While we grieve Rod's passing, we give God great thanks for sending Rod into this world and sending him into our lives. Our peace candle today is lit in loving memory of Rod and in honor of the peace and justice work he cared so very much about. And may the light of this candle remind us of Rod's faithful dedication and encourage us to continue that legacy of work. Dr. John Roderick Davis peacefully passed away from this world on April 1st, 2023. Born on July 15th, 1936, Rod was a native of Guntersville, Alabama. He was the first son of John J. Davis and Willie Nixon Davis of Horton, Alabama. He is survived by his brothers, Phil Davis, who is married to Jacqueline of Millsboro, Delaware, and Garen Davis, who's married to Rosemary of Opelika, and numerous nieces and nephews whom he dearly loved. As a graduate of Albertville High School, Rod was later inducted into the school's Hall of Fame, graduating from Howard College, which is now known as Samford University, Boston University, Yale Divinity School, and Columbia University. Dr. Davis taught at Rutgers and the City University of New York's John Jay College for 20 years before returning in 1990 to Samford as Dean of the Howard College of Arts and Sciences. As dean, he increased the faculty by 1/3 and established departments of classics, philosophy, political science, and geography. Rod guided major core curriculum reform at Samford. Rod returned to his first love of teaching in 2001 and retired in 2012. He was admired by his students, who often asked him to officiate their marriages. Rod was the winner of many teaching and administrative honors and was widely published in the 20th century English and American literature. He received presidential appointments to the boards of Harry S. Truman Foundation and the Selma Montgomery Freedom Trail. Rod enjoyed his roses and gave flowers wherever he visited. He had a generous heart for those less fortunate or oppressed, and he wasn't afraid to take a stand to right any wrong. The plight of the Cherokee Indians was one of his recent interests. He loved books, gifted others with them, and assembled a large and varied library. Rod began the Davis Lecture Series, which Samford named in his honor. His last unfinished effort was to write a biography of Dr. John Allen Wyeth, pioneer of modern education for surgeons. Rod's family would like to praise his congregation of Baptist Church of the Covenant, his friends, and the UAB teams of the 9th floor and palliative care unit who were beyond kind to Rod and them all. Rod's legacy will live in the hearts and minds of his many students and in the lives and hearts of all of us. Friends, may our time together in worship and remembrance today give us the peace and assurance we need to take up the mantles of those beloved saints who have gone ahead. So come, let us prepare our hearts and minds to receive all the blessings that this time of remembrance brings. Let us come to worship.
As you are able, would you stand in body or spirit for the call to worship? Our call to worship comes from the first few verses of the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him, and then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven." Let us pray. O fount of every blessing, you are a gracious and loving God. We recognize your holy hand revealed to us in creation and in the fabric of our lives. We yearn for your gentle power to come to us in this hour in ways that speak comfort and peace to our very human hearts. Surround us, O God, in ways that reveal your hopeful presence, your faithful love. And in the name of Christ, we make this prayer. Amen.
From the Psalms, the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And from the book of Micah, chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. Wherefore shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before the high God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves of a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, or with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give him my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He hath showed thee, O man, what is good. And what doth the Lord require of thee? But to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God.
At 28 years old, William Wordsworth walked along the banks of the River Wye in southeast Wales and composed a 159-line poem all in his head. And though Wordsworth had visited this very same location north of Tintern Abbey 5 years prior, he was just now able to truly appreciate the tremendous beauty of the landscape surrounding him and reflect on how that beauty had shaped him and sustained him throughout the past 5 years. Wordsworth's heart is filled with wondrous joy and gratitude. He writes, "These beauteous forms, through a long absence, have not been to me as is a landscape to a blind man's eye, but oft in lonely rooms and mid the din of towns and cities I have owed to them. In hours of weariness, sensations sweet, felt in the blood and felt along the heart, and passing even into my pure mind with tranquil restoration, feelings too of unremembered pleasure, such perhaps as have no slight or trivial influence on that best portion of a good man's life, his little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and love. Nor less, I trust, to them I may have owed another gift of aspect more sublime, that blessed mood in which the burthen of the mystery, in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened, that serene and blessed mood in which the affections gently lead us on until the breath of this corporal frame and even the motion of our human blood almost suspended, we are laid asleep in body and become a living soul, while with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. Tintern Abbey was a poem that spoke to Rod Davis's soul, because Rod was a man who knew what it meant to see into the life of things. Rod loved life. He loved all the beauty and pleasures this world had to offer: literature, art, ideas, good food, deep, thoughtful conversations, and especially dear friends and family. The last words that Rod spoke to me from his hospital room expressed his profound gratitude for his loved ones. With tears forming in his eyes, he thoughtfully declared, "I am so blessed to have such great friends and such a wonderful family." Rod knew how much we all loved him, and he never once took that love for granted. And just as much as Rod was loved, Rod loved in return. Rod loved his family. His brothers, Phil and Garen, all his nieces and nephews, and his many cousins, you are all so precious to him. The roots of Rod's faith were formed and nurtured by his family. Their love and care for him carried him throughout his life, even through those final days in hospice care. Garen and Rosemary, your tender presence was a holy gift to him. You were the image of Christ that Rod needed to assure him that he could go on into Jesus' loving arms. And while Rod never had children of his own, he was a dad. Dean Dad, as Eric called him. Eric, Rod loved you so much, and he was so proud of all that you accomplished. But he was even more proud of the person you have always been. You were very much a son to him. Rod loved his students. Young, eager minds brought energy to his life. He loved teaching and learning, and Rod never stopped being a student himself, and he gained just as much from his students as he gave to them. Rod loved his friends, and he had so many wonderful friends. At each phase of his life, he just kept collecting more. Roger, Lynn, and Deirdre, who are joining us on the live stream. You saw Rod grow from a wide-eyed, optimistic young adult to a wide-eyed, optimistic 86-year-old. You were his lifelong, beloved friends, and he treasured you. Jenny and Rosemary and Jean and Carol and Kathy and Peggy and Morgan and Dennis and Janice and Dwayne and Ronald and Elaine. Your special friendship to Rod gave him comfort and grounding when he experienced the challenges of these last few years. He so appreciated your presence and your companionship. Lynn describes Rod's friendship in this way. She said, "Every moment he cared more for me than I could possibly appreciate or understand." If Rod Davis was your friend, you know exactly what Lynn is talking about. Rod loved his church. He joined Baptist Church of the Covenant in 1992, and he was grateful to be a part of the Peacemonger Sunday School class. Rod was a large support of our sister church, Shalom Baptist Church in Cuba, and he was also a great support of our music ministry. If you look in front of you and you see a hymnal, you can thank Rod Davis for that gift. Rod loved God and sought to follow the ways of Jesus even when it went against the culture. During times of racial segregation, Rod would secretly move up the sign that divided the whites only and blacks only section of the bus, making sure that African Americans families had ample seating on that bus. A highlight of Rod's life is when he traveled to Montgomery to attend a service at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, where he heard the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. preach. Rod brought along with him a copy of Howard Thurman's book, Jesus and the Disinherited, for Dr. King to sign. Rod loved his family. Rod loved his students. He loved his friends. He loved his church. He loved God. And Rod also loved books. Show of hands, how many of us were ever given a book from Rod Davis? Here are just a few pieces of the treasure I inherited from him below our candle. I want to read to you now a selection from one of the books that I inherited from Rod. It is from this book, The Life of the Beloved by Henry Nouwen. And if any of you received a used copy of a book, a former copy of his, you know that Rod loved to highlight and underline in books. And I want to read to you from a section that he highlighted, a section that he found important to him. One of the greatest acts of faith is to believe that the few years we live on this earth are like a little seed planted in very rich soil. For this seed to bear fruit, it must die. We often see or feel only the dying, but the harvest will be abundant, even when we ourselves are not the harvesters. Today, we give God tremendous thanks for the harvest that Rod has provided us. May his bounty help us to view the world with wide-eyed optimism and fascination, so we can come to a vision where we, like Rod, really see into the life of things.
It is my privilege to deliver these remarks on behalf of Roger Lovett, who is not able to be physically present with us, though present in many ways otherwise. Roger was the pastor here from 1992 to 2000 and a dear friend of Rod Davis. Mary Oliver writes, "Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift. And here we are, family, friends, colleagues, and more, so much more. And today, crowded into this room are so many holders of our boxes full of darkness." Rod was 86 when he died, and his last 4 years were hard indeed. This brilliant friend left us much too soon. And today we come to remember not that sad leave-taking, but the gift, the amazing gift that we all find in our own box of darkness. Not darkness, really, even in our own hard grief, but more. Light, incredible light that streamed through the days of Rod Davis. I met him first at Howard College in 1954. He was 1 year behind me. I've tried to remember how it all started. I do remember he invited me up to his house in Horton, Alabama. I remember sitting in his bedroom and he asked, "Do you know the poet T.S. Eliot?" I didn't. He said, "Let me read you something that comes from his Choruses from the Rock." These words were written in 1930. "Remember the faith that took men from home at the call of a wandering preacher. Our age is an age of moderate virtue and of moderate vice, when men will not lay down the cross because they will never assume it. Yet nothing is impossible. Nothing. To men of faith and conviction, let us, therefore, make perfect our will. O God, help us." And so I was hooked. He opened so many doors, which led to more doors and more doors. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Stride Toward Freedom, Bonhoeffer's The Cost of Discipleship, Frederick Buechner, whom I had never heard of, Thomas Wolfe's You Can't Go Home Again, and so many more. Thank you, Rod, for opening that magical door that has never closed. And what he did for me, he has done for so many. His brothers, Phil and Garen, and his nieces and nephews, Eric, dear Eric, and so very many others in this crowded room and beyond. We have all sloshed through the darkness of many things, but Rod, Dr. Davis, Dean Davis, helped us so many times to see the light which no darkness can ever put out. I went to seminary in Louisville, but he went north, Yale and Ridgefield and Boston and New York, and then back years later to Birmingham. Dr. Hull called one day and asked, "What would you think of Roderick Davis as dean here at Samford?" And I said, "Oh, that would be great if you could get him." And so he came, bringing with him a breath of fresh air, and the students and faculty loved him. Yes, in time, he did become a legend. And on his retirement in 2001, his colleagues honored him with the J. Roderick Davis Lecture Series, which has brought scholars and public intellectuals from all over to the campus. When I was considering coming to this church as pastor, he called and said, "If you come, I will join your church." And he did. And like so many other things, Rod made a difference here. And he was a strong supporter of every pastor. I could talk all day about this friend of mine, and if you had the chance, so many of you could stand and tell your own Rod Davis story, for we all have them. I want to tell you a story which may seem like a diversion, but bear with me. One of my mentors was Carlisle Marney, a great Baptist preacher. He served for years at the First Baptist Church of Austin, Texas. And once a week, he would meet with a group of minister colleagues for breakfast, and one day he left that church to go serve as the minister of the Myers Park Baptist Church in Charlotte. And later, one morning in Austin at breakfast, one of the servers asked that group, "I've not seen Dr. Marney here for a long time. Is he still down at the church?" Those gathered around the table looked at each other, and one preacher spoke up and said, "Oh yes, Dr. Marney is still down at the church." And as I think of Rod, I would say he's still here, in the hearts of his family, in the hearts of all those from place to place where he worked and taught, and at this university and others, and he is still at his church. And person after person here could say, "Oh yes, he is still here." Let us, we grievers, lift up not only our prayers of thanksgiving for Rod, but let us also lift up his family and what a gift he must have been to you and to Lynn and to all of us. In the first sermon Jesus ever gave, he said, "I've come to heal the brokenhearted." And he also said, "Blessed are those that mourn, for they shall be comforted." This box of darkness is only part of the story, but we remember Rod Davis and light, incredible light. I want to close with a benediction that comes from Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. I practiced. Karamazov. I was not an English major. The benediction. What keeps me going is that I believe like a child that suffering will be healed and made up for, that in the world's finale something so great will come to pass, that it is going to suffice for all our hearts, for the comforting of all our sorrows, for the atonement of all the crimes of humanity. And I want to be there when suddenly everyone understands what it is all been for.
Good afternoon. It's so wonderful to see you all here in loving memory, paying your respects to my dear uncle, celebrating his life. My dad, Phil, couldn't be here today due to health reasons, so he and my mom, Jacqueline, want to send their love and respects, as do my brothers, Chris and Richard. There's going to be a lot of overlap. People have mentioned things that I'm going to mention too, but that was the Roderick we all knew and loved, so I apologize. I had a special relationship with Roderick. He was my uncle. At least that's how I feel, but I wouldn't be surprised if each of his nieces and nephews would say the same, because I'm sure you'll agree, Roderick treated us as if we were his own children. For me, Roderick had a profound influence on my life. I'd like to tell you why he was so special. Overall, when I think about Roderick and how he lived, I feel that his life was the definitive study on how to live with joy, respect, dignity, and love for one another. You see, ideals that most of us strive to achieve, but often don't, came naturally to Roderick. I look at these special qualities of his and how he put them into action in his life. And I see them as gifts he left to me and to all of us, exemplary gifts, lessons I learned through his examples. Let me share some of them with you. One of Roderick's greatest gifts was his ability to listen intently, to make you feel that he truly heard and understood you. Growing up, Roderick always spoke to me like an adult and had a gentle way of reassuring me that while my problems were real, they would pass and all would be okay. He was like this for all of us, especially his students, I heard. When I learned years later that they had nicknamed him Dean Dad, I was not at all surprised. He was someone anyone could talk to. The ability to empathize, another of his gifts to us all, came naturally to Roderick because he loved people from all walks of life. He'd chat with anyone, and he truly cared about their struggles. He often spoke about the important job of motherhood. As Mother's Day arrives tomorrow, I'm reminded of how often he spoke about the value of a mother's work and the need for society to support families and children. Whenever we talk, he always made me feel that being a, quote, stay-at-home mom was the most important job in the world. Roderick's devotion to family was another of his gifts I cherish. He was fully engaged in our lives and rejoiced in our accomplishments, no matter how small. When I was growing up, he couldn't wait to hear what I was studying in school and insisted on hearing the latest piano piece I was stumbling through, sitting right up in the front row of my grandparents' living room. He nodded along, ignoring my mistakes, and his comments were always positive and encouraging, so I was never afraid to perform for him. Roderick's devotion to family meant he went out of his way to attend every holiday, wedding, funeral, and family gathering I can remember. And he wasn't just going out of a sense of duty. He truly wanted to be there. In almost every family photo we went through, his face was always there in the crowd somewhere. Remarkably, over the years, he traveled to visit me in every home I lived, and even came to our home 6 years ago in Delaware at the age of 80, and he could still outwalk me then. Roderick's devotion to family was tested, however, the summer before my 5th grade year, when he rode with my grandparents all the way from Horton, Alabama to Arkansas to pick up my big brother Chris and me and take us on to the Grand Canyon. It was a long ride. But there was Roderick, squeezed into the back seat of my grandparents' Buick with Chris and me through those long, torturous hours through the scorching desert. His number one job quickly became keeping Chris and me from tearing one another apart. I doubt he knew what he was getting into. But Roderick wanted to go on that trip to give us that experience. And lucky for us, when Roderick was along, every trip was richer and deeper. Along the way, we stopped in Santa Fe at an adobe village market. As we meandered through the packed stalls, I watched him engage with the vendors, admiring their turquoise trinkets and asking how their hand-woven blankets were made, what they ate, how they cooked. His questions made me think of questions. Seeing Roderick's interest in Native American life displayed another wonderful example for me: respect and appreciation for other cultures. What a wonderful gift for me to witness as a young child. Another one of Roderick's gifts was being a natural teacher. In fact, Roderick was a teacher everywhere he went. He knew so much about so many topics. My dad said that Roderick was the only person he has ever met who knew from a very young age what he wanted to do in life, and that was teach. Even Roderick's sermons as a young minister, my dad said, emphasized analyzing and understanding the scriptures, educating his congregation about Christianity. One of my most treasured memories is the week my mom and I spent in New York City with him when I was a college student from Indiana. Roderick's supreme generosity, another exemplary gift, and his eagerness to teach were on full display that week. He really showed us the town, sparing no detail. I was thrilled to finally get to see my Uncle Roderick's New York apartment and the big city he called home, because I grew up in a small town in Arkansas. I love seeing him in his element, taking us to all the sights, reciting little-known facts as we passed landmarks, discussing exhibits at the Met, ordering exotic food I'd never heard of, hailing cabs in the rain for Broadway shows, ballets, and Lincoln Center concerts, always dashing into our seats not a moment before the curtain rose. In that one week, Roderick exposed me to a world I couldn't have imagined, and I could see by the joy in his face that giving me that experience was as rewarding for him as receiving it was for me. And a few years later, Uncle Roderick treated my younger brother Richard to a similar experience in London and Paris. We certainly were lucky to have such a generous uncle. When I graduated from college in 1987 and announced that I planned to marry my college sweetheart, a man from India, Roderick discarded the murmurings of an interracial marriage and proclaimed, "There is only one race, the human one." He rode with my grandparents to Indiana and stood by our side in our small at-home wedding. Tushar and I then made our home in New Jersey, and we're happy to know Roderick was only a river away. We still laugh about the first time we met him in the city for dinner at an Indian restaurant. Roderick was so eager to introduce my Indian husband to Indian food. But that was the essence of Roderick, always eager to share what he knew, and we loved his enthusiasm. Sadly, only 3 years later, Roderick left for Sanford. I was so sad to know he'd no longer be only a river away. He had been so helpful to us in our early years and even got me in to see one of the leading surgeons in New York when I needed it. I'll be forever grateful to him for that. But I knew he was happy to return to his alma mater and become dean and be closer to Gayron and his children. As Tushar and I started our own family, Roderick stayed in regular contact, always asking about our kids, and of course, sending books every year at Christmas, just as he had done for us as children. I'll get back to the books in a minute. Roderick was especially interested in my son, who was diagnosed with profound autism at the age of 2. Back then, in 1995, before computers and cell phones, getting information was difficult, and there wasn't much documented research on autism. But Roderick knew where to turn. He introduced me to B.F. Skinner's work, and over the years, continued to send just the right books and articles on the subject, somehow uniquely aware of what each of us were going through. Roderick again showed empathy, not sympathy, something he knew we didn't want. He never patronized us or offered false promises. Rather, in the face of uncertainty, he eluded a sense of quiet faith and optimism. Whenever we spoke, he had a way of making me feel better. Just a few months ago, I had the pleasure of telling Roderick that our daughter Monica, his great niece, had just defended her dissertation for her PhD. He was thrilled to hear there would be another doctor in the Davis family. Another exemplary gift, one that many of us could use today, was Roderick's civility during times of political discourse. There was no doubt anyone who knew Roderick knew where he stood politically. But while he was vocal about his beliefs and firm in his principles, he was never confrontational or judgmental. He always made his points with civility, humor, and respect for opposing views. Now let's get back to those books. No discussion of Roderick would be complete without mentioning the books. I estimate that over the years, he must have sent at least 1,000 books just to us family members. That's not counting friends, students, colleagues, and the donations he made to libraries over the years. At Christmas time every year, we'd receive a huge box of hand-selected books he thought each of us would like, for all ages and stages, the young and the old. And he continued shipping books to my family up until just about 2 years ago. He must have spent a fortune, but because of all those books, I became a lover of literature and more curious about the world beyond my small surroundings. What a priceless gift. Roderick's books were clearly his most precious possessions. I too feel that way about my books. When he had to move from his home into a one-room apartment at the assisted living facility, I can't imagine his agony at having to choose from so many books collected over a lifetime, which ones to keep and which ones to let go. The day after he passed, I asked Gayrin and Rosie, if they would take me into his room. There stood one lone bookshelf, supporting the last few precious books he chose to keep. Carefully, I held each of his 7 Bibles, one given to him in 1962 when he was ordained a minister. Many of his books dealt with slavery and its ramifications, a topic of special interest to him. All contained additional material pressed inside, reviews, and yellowed newspaper articles he had come across, neatly cut and preserved between the pages for years. One book in particular struck my eye, an old, thick, burgundy hardcover with fraying edges and at least a dozen Post-it notes sticking out. Carefully, I picked it up and opened it slowly. It was James Joyce's Ulysses, a 1934 edition. On the inside cover, Roderick had taped an outline labeled the ground plan of Ulysses, which everyone needs if they're going to read Ulysses. And on every page were his tiny scribbled notes in the margins, underlined passages, notations, citing symbolism and metaphors, etc. I imagine Roderick must have taught this classic work, but maybe he just studied it for fun, which would be something Roderick would do on a Friday night. Before this, I couldn't say I belonged to that small club of those who have actually finished Ulysses, but I carefully packed that book, along with several others in my luggage, and brought them back to my home. Soon, with Roderick's help, I too may just be able to finish the infamous Ulysses. Another great gift from Roderick. So this was Roderick, a people lover, an empathetic listener, an ordained minister who lived his faith, generous to all who knew him. a caring, enthusiastic teacher, loyal to family, respectful to those with differing views, lover of literature and knowledge. In conclusion, there's one final exemplary gift I'd like to mention, one of many I am striving to emulate, and that was his chipper outlook. It sounds rather elementary, but this was one of Roderick's greatest attributes, in my opinion. As my family shared memories of Roderick, none of us could remember him ever complaining, even when the dementia took hold and things got physically very demanding. He always shrugged off life's little inconveniences and focused on the positive, for he knew no one enjoyed listening to others whine, but also he was too busy learning, laughing, teaching, and helping others to let anything slow him down. To all of you who supported Roderick during his past 3 difficult years especially, I'd like to say a sincere thank you, especially to Garen and Rosie. You worked so hard to help him through his challenges and were there for him every step of the way. And Holly and Brian, you did so much for him over the years, especially at the end. And Jenny, you were an angel watching over him, coming to rescue him every time he needed it. And thank you to the entire care team of friends and church members. I'm so glad Erica named them by name, but you were all in our hearts and prayers. Whenever Roderick spoke, he always emphasized how grateful he was to you all for the care and love you showed to him. He was very fortunate to have you all in his life. All of us are blessed to have known Roderick and to have been the receivers of his many exemplary gifts. They will be with me for the rest of my days, and with hard work and God's grace, I hope to pass along at least 1 or 2 of these to my children.
The tragedy of being the last speaker. Quick revisions. I think I'll take a very romantic note as well, Reverend Cooper. William Wordsworth, the poet that has already been introduced to you, wrote another collection of verse, Intimations of Immortality, some years after Tintern Abbey. And he wrote, "There was a time when meadow, grove, and stream in every common sight to me did seem, apparelled in the freshness of a dream. As it were, it is no more. The rainbow comes and goes, and lovely is the rose. And this I know where'er I go, that there has passed away a glory from the earth." That poem is about remembrance, and we have been celebrating and remembering this afternoon. I decided to take a walk a couple of hours ago with Hannah across Sanford's campus to center my soul and my thinking. And it was there that a recollection of familiar names and experiences all quickened to memory. I remember Dr. Thomas Quartz once saying, "Eric, life is filled with incidents, accidents, providence." And I am sure that it's providence that brought us all here today. We each could tell our Rod Davis stories. And I am very confident that it was providence that brought me into the life of Roderick Davis, Dean Davis, as I always called him. It was 31 years ago when I found myself walking across the campus, and Rod Davis came up to me and he said, "I've heard about you." I'd only been at Sanford 2 weeks. And I said, "You have?" And he said, "Come by my office this afternoon. I want to talk." And of course, I went by his office that afternoon, and Glenda Martin, who's here, who was the right and the left hand of Dean Davis for so long, allowed me to pass the bar. She says, "Why are you here?" And I said, "I don't know." She says, "Come on in the door." And that afternoon, we sat in his office lined with books, and we began a conversation that has lasted for 31 years. He wanted to know all about me, what brought me from Montgomery to Sanford, what my hopes and aspirations were, what I wanted to get out of an education. And I felt so good talking to him that I even shared with him my anxieties and my fears. I remember sharing with him that I was the first in my family to go to college. I had such high expectations for what excellence was, and I feared that I would fail. I would let down all of the people in my small town who had nurtured me along the lines of things eternal and who had helped me by giving me $5 bills here and there. And he took my hand and he said, "Trust me, that will not happen. I will make sure of that." The pages in my diary record so many of those incidents, accidents, and providence, too many to share with you this afternoon. But as I was walking across the campus this morning, several came to mind. In my freshman year, at the very end of it, Dean Davis asked me to come by his office, and he gave me, Susan, a bundle of books. A note was written, and he said, "I want you this summer to read these books, and I want you to return back to my office at the beginning of next semester so that we can continue this conversation." It was James Baldwin's Go Down Moses, Fire Next Time, a beautiful volume of Emily Dickinson and William Wordsworth, and a beautiful volume of Yeats and Langston Hughes, and a little Faulkner, just to add a bit more. I read that summer like I'd never read before because I knew I had to pass the test. Rod Davis was never technically my teacher, but he introduced me to a world of ideas that intellectually liberated me and helped me to imagine a world that was beyond the town that I grew up in. And he, in so many ways, was my Mr. Keating. I returned and I went to his office and we sat down, and I felt that we talked the sun down. We talked about Yeats. The beginning of that fall, I went away to London to do a Jan term, and I came back early, and I needed a place to stay because I wanted to use the library. And I think that was the first time that I moved into 708 Rockford Drive. We sat at that table dissecting W.B. Yeats, The Lake Isle of Innisfree. I still have my volume so richly underlined. And we shall find some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. It was there that I read the New York Times for the first time, and I listened to NPR, The Morning Rituals of Rod Davis. And that winter, he took me to my first classical music concert, Elgar, Nimrod. And over the many years that we befriended one another, I discovered the nuances of Bach, the virtuoso of Mahler, the tonal incadations of Wagner. It became one poetic experience as we, even with Bill Collins, studied the Goldberg variations. In 1996, my diary entry records that I was going off to Scotland. But before I could get there, I had a lot of essays to write for the Rotary Ambassadorial Scholarship. Rod Davis spent night after night editing my essays with Steve Epley. He'll never be rewarded for all the investments that he made in so many. I stayed at 708 Rockford many times. I could probably count over 500 days total. I heard the telephone calls. As a silent witness, I saw the support he gave young faculty, resources to students that he gave so that they could continue their semesters. I was a witness to his generosity and to his love, to his embracing everyone. I went away to Scotland, and in 1996, he visited me, and we visited Robert Burns's home. And for the first time in Scotland, I started reading Burns. But he left me with a copy of Frederick Buechner, Listen to Your Life. He also reminded me that the world is so uncertain, and that my own place in it would be determined by my own sense of self-confidence. And when I returned to Scotland in 2000 and I needed a place to stay to write my bibliography, naturally, I went to 708 Rockford. I was uncertain of where I was going to go or what I was going to do, but it gave us a lot of time together, 2 months. And he decided that every morning we would read Yeats, and every evening we would read T.S. Eliot. The little getting stuck with me. What we call the beginning is often the end, and to make an end is to make a beginning. 2001, I got a job. I got a job in Washington, D.C., and I don't think Dean Dad, that's what I transitioned from Dean Davis to Dean Dad, I don't think that he had ever been more excited about a person working in the Bush administration than he was for me. Susan spoke of politics. We differed somewhat. We had great arguments at that table in the kitchen. He grounded me and reminded me of the dialectical dilemmas of liberty and justice and light and darkness, of moral man and immoral society. He reminded me of all the lessons that I had gleaned from reading Reinhold Niebuhr and Dennis Sansom's class, that there were ironies in American history, that the destiny of man was determined by one's own investment in truth and the future. And he sent me emails, often to my discontent, about what the Bush administration was getting wrong. I also record in my diary that year that a colleague said to President Bush, "That Motley guy's a bit weird. He is the only person in the White House that listens to NPR every day and reads the New York Times." And of course, there's always the end. Dr. Kortz also told me that life is filled with REM, relationships, experiences, and memories. I think we're here today because of a relationship that we shared with the most remarkable man, experiences too numerous to name, and memories that we will forever hold on to. Just a few. The first person that I introduced Dean Dad to in my company of larger family was Hannah. He came to Washington in 2018, went to brunch, and said, "I thought it would never happen, so prayers are answered." We made our trip to the National Gallery of Art. Little did we know that it would become a place of dwelling for us. And we talked about the future. He visited our home, and we said prayers together. I have had more private conversations with Dean Dad than I have with anyone else. When I came to Samford University, I had great expectations. Much was promised to me: a good education, a wonderful experience with good teachers, so many of them here in this room, wonderful staff that would enrich and nurture my own experience, but no one ever told me that I would leave with a dad. He filled a very significant blank in my life. Those last several weeks, I found myself in his hospital room sitting. The Monday before he went to palliative care, he was in and out every 30 minutes. And all I knew was to remind him of the things that he had taught me. We recited Yeats and T.S. Eliot. We talked about all that was wrong with Joseph Conrad. We even read some Niebuhr. He had me to read Little Gidding aloud from the four quartets. And we spoke of the future. He said to me, "I don't know what's next." And as Lynn Davis reminded me, I was to assure him that all would perfectly unfold just as God had planned it. There's a wonderful line in Yeats that he taught me: "I think where man's glory most begins and ends, and I say that my glory is that I have such friends." For the second time in my life, I was a silent witness. In the hospital room, sitting there as others came and went: Melody, Rosemary Fisk, Jenny. Dennis Sansom coming and expressing gratitude for the investment he had made in his career, and even the prayer that you gave, Dr. Sansom, almost a benediction. I heard conversations that I perhaps should not have heard, holding the telephone to his ear so that friends could say their goodbyes. I saw family coming and going, and I witnessed in a beautiful and miraculous way a team of nurses supporting him and loving him, all Samford graduates. They knew that he was Dean Davis. They knew that he was Dean Dad. Wordsworth gives us so much. Wordsworth also reminds us that our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises within us, our life star, hath had elsewhere its setting and cometh from afar. Not an entire forgetfulness, nor in utter nakedness, but in trailing clouds of glory do we come to God who is our home. And not to acknowledge that all of his friends surrounded him far and near, students like Mary Beth Covert-Steele, faculty that he encouraged like Betsy Holloway, but his best friend, Lynn Davis. If you knew Rod Davis, you had heard the name Lynn Davis. He loved her, talked about her, and celebrated her. And if you went to his house, you didn't see a refrigerator that had any empty space because every family member's photograph was there. He loved telling the stories of those he loved. In those last days, he spoke of his devoted brother and sister-in-law. And for the gift that you have given me, the Davis family, the gift of a dad by sharing your brother and your uncle and your grandfather, I am extremely grateful. And this I know, where'er we go, that there has passed away a glory from the earth. Amen.
Friends, after today's service, we invite you all to join us and Rod's family in our fellowship hall for a visitation and reception. Receive now this benediction. May the God of peace grant you perfect peace and living hope and glorious grace and steadfast love until the day breaks and the shadows flee away. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.